We've got questions. Well, we've got answers. We have the man to answer them. Jeffrey Levine from Buckingham Wealth Partners. Jeffrey, welcome back to another episode of Ask the Hammer.
It is good to be back with you as always, Bob.
Ask the Buckinghammer. So in my inbox, I have a question. Goes like this. It says, it's tax filing season, and I'm not sure whether I should file now or later.
This is a really common question that we hear during tax time is, how quickly should I file my return? And ultimately, my opinion is it's always best to file as quickly as possible once you have your information. And that's an important caveat. So let's start with the first thing. It's best to file as early as possible. Well, why would you do that? There are a variety of reasons. First of all, the sooner you file your return, the sooner you might get your refund. And if you have to pay, filing sooner doesn't mean you have to pay sooner. You still have until the April 15th deadline. So it might accelerate your refund, but it doesn't mean you actually have to pay any more any quicker. Two, it lets you know what the damage is if you do have to pay, right? You're not all of a sudden shocked on April 10th and you have 5 days to come up with a lot more money than you thought. You've got a little bit more time to prepare. Perhaps the biggest incentive to filing early, though, is that it reduces the possibility for someone else to file a fraudulent tax return using your information, which can create all sorts of problems. Because once an individual files a tax return that's accepted by the IRS, it will generally block other tax returns for individuals with the same Social Security number, because the IRS says, well, only one person can have that number, and we've already got that return. Now, eventually, it will get worked out and sorted through and fixed, but that eventually means it might be a long time to deal with the IRS, which is understaffed and underfunded. It might mean your refund, if you're entitled to one, is delayed for a long time. So filing early can benefit all of those things. Now, having said that, I also gave the caveat, as soon as you have all your information and as soon as you're confident that information is accurate. Lots of times you'll get 1099s, and then sometimes a week later, 2 weeks later, you get revised 1099s. You might be waiting for K1s that come oftentimes later on, either close to March 15th, if not even further. So you want to make sure you have all of that information available, because if not, you're going to end up having to amend your return later anyway to report the correct amounts. And that can become both a time-intensive and financially expensive proposition to do. So file as soon as possible once you get all that information accurate, or at least to the point where you think it's accurate.
Yeah. So I guess it's worth asking about filing for an extension too, if we're going to file late.
Yeah, well, certainly if you know you're not going to hit that April 15th deadline, or you're coming close to it, filing an extension is always a good idea. There's really not a downside to filing an extension. It's automatically granted for most individuals up to 6 months. So that takes you to the October 15th deadline. And just because you have until October 15th doesn't mean you still can't file if you get everything done by April 15th. And the important thing to note here is that the penalty for not filing a return or an extension is actually much more severe than the penalty for not paying a tax that you owe. So sometimes I run into folks and they say, well, I didn't file because I owed a lot of money and I didn't want the IRS, I didn't want to have to pay it. You have to pay it no matter what. If you don't pay, there's a penalty, but that penalty is potentially only a tenth of what it is if you don't file. So even if you can't pay, file, let the IRS know. And look, if you need, you can start working on a payment plan or any of these other opportunities, but don't not file because you owe. It's always better to file. Yes, there's a penalty for not paying, but again, that penalty is much smaller than the penalty for not filing that return on time, or at least a timely extension.
Yeah. So, and it's important to note who should file, right? If you have W-2 income, 1099, a K-1.
Yeah. Most individuals with income will probably end up filing. There is an exception if you've got sort of a more nominal amount of income and you're below the standard deduction amount. You may be able to avoid filing your tax return, but a lot of times it's worth filing anyway. For instance, young children, let's say, who have a summer job and they make $5,000 or $6,000 of earnings. Well, by filing a tax return, you've got evidence that you had those earnings that can help support in the future, if Social Security doesn't have your income reported correctly for Social Security benefit purposes. It can help you if you want to make, let's say, a IRA or Roth IRA contribution. You can show evidence, once again, of the earnings. So even those who don't have to file a tax return sometimes should file a tax return. If it's not going to cost you anything, it's worth it. Plus, if the IRS or your employer withheld money from your paycheck and you weren't required to file a tax return, the only way to get that money back is by filing a tax return. So many individuals who don't have to still should file that return.
All right, Jeffrey answered our reader's question and then some.
Well, we appreciate it. It's a great question. Expect a lot of those around this time of year. So if you've got a question you'd like Bob and I to tackle, let us know. Give us a shout by emailing us at askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. Again, that's askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. And Bob and I look forward to answering your questions real soon.